Everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. I am talking with an author on this episode for the second time, a second episode, and that is the very prolific Arie Kaplan. Arie, thank you for jumping in, joining, and are you currently writing a book right now as we're talking? Is that happening, perhaps?
I am. I actually just hold on one second, and that's why that is the way that it is. The end. Okay.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice, nice. Cool.
So I can't tell you what that one's about because I was very left that ending kind of open. Could be about anything. Yeah, I thank you for that. It's good to be here again. I had a lot of fun last time. Not sure I will this time as well.
Likewise, likewise. Now, since last we met, you've worked on a variety of projects, and we have a lot of those to talk about. Um, Curious by means of this sort of a step into the things that you're sharing about, what is it like, and how do you manage multiple projects at once? Because that's clearly something that is part of your mainstay. You're very good at that. So, any
Thanks.
particular words of advice?
It's weird because in the past, sometimes like I don't know if this is because as your career goes on and as you get older, your brain changes, the way you work changes. Sometimes I feel the need to like switch things up. And so the way that I work sometimes changes. Um, there was a point in my career where I could be working on like four or five different projects at the same time. And the way that I did it was to like have like a certain number of hours in the day for each one.
Hmm. Hmm.
These days, it's a little less like that. I sometimes do that, but it's more like this week I'm going to work on this project, and the next week I'm going to work on the next project. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
it's more regimented like that these days. That having been said, I usually do have a bunch of different things I'm working on at once, but that's usually the way I sort of uh, boil it down. That's the way I kind of like organize it. And I found that also you can never be too organized. I take copious notes whenever I'm on whenever I have a meeting or a phone call with one of the editors that I'm working for, or if it's a TV project with the head writer or executive producer, um, or it's a video game project, with the creative director or lead designer or something. Um, and that helps because your memory can be faulty, and so that it's good to look at these notes, but also just the amount of research that you have to do with all of these projects, no matter what they are, you can't be overstated. Doing your homework is so important. Doing your research is so important, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, whatever you're writing about. So much of writing is getting into the right headspace to write. And
Hmm.
so much of that is preparation and research. It's that old quote that I think some people say that Abe Lincoln said it. Let's say that it was him. I think it's been attributed to a few people, but if I had 7 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend 6 of those hours sharpening the axe.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
a lot of time sharpening the axe.
Mm. Like it, like it. Yeah, I may borrow that quote for tomorrow, actually.
Sure, yeah.
Now, we'll just kind of start with a project that is near and dear to me because this was a series that I grew up on that has recently been re-released, and not in terms of the same episodes, but they're actually new episodes, and the last one was a big shocker in a variety of ways, and that's X-Men 97. So you've had
Oh
the
yeah.
chance to sort of dabble in some of that world. What has that been like to sort of play with?
That was a lot of fun, and it's exactly what I'm talking about, where I had to rewatch
Mm-hmm.
the so much of the X-Men the animated series from the 90s, because it is a little golden books version of X-Men the animated series from the 90s. Um and I had to rewatch so much of it. I was taking so many notes on like quotes that different characters were saying. Oh, that would be good to put that in the little golden book. That would be okay. This is a good thing that Bishop is saying. This is a good thing that like Jean Grey is. Here's a great like set piece where Scott is like blasting someone with his optic beams. And by the way, there are references to specific episodes of X-Men, the animated series, in the X-Men Little Golden Book that I wrote. I can't say which ones, but it's coming out in just a few weeks, so hopefully everyone will find out soon. It's coming out, I think it's either May 4th or May 7th. I can't remember exactly, but I know it's coming out in May. Um, and it's, you know, a lot of it was, okay, how can I explain who these characters are to someone who's very young? Because it's for 2 to 5 year olds, but it's also
Mhm.
for their parents. Let's be honest.
Absolutely. I still read Golden books. Absolutely.
And I mean, they're fun. And I know, and you're not alone because like it's there's a lot of, let's say, okay, when I wrote the Loki Little Golden Book, a lot of, I may have talked about this last time, I don't remember, but a lot of people who bought the book were adults who were big fans of Tom Hiddleston. And so that's to be expected, even though it's ostensibly for kids. Uh, you're gonna have a lot of adult fans buying it as well for various reasons, and that's totally cool. And then obviously some of them are going to be fans who are parents who want to read it to their kids and sort of introduce their kids to these fictional universes. And I think that's true with X-Men as well. So I really wanted to do right by the fans. I really wanted to make a book, to write a book that fans could be happy with, and they could go, "Oh, okay, that's a reference to that 5-part story arc there in season 3 or whatever." Um, and really showcase each character, each of the main cast, and what they can do, what their power set is, and sort of explain that in a really fun and entertaining way for kids who might not be familiar with these characters at all. And, but there's a lot to unpack. What is a mutant? What are the X-Men as a team? What is Charles Xavier? Who is Charles Xavier? What are his powers? What's his
Mhm.
role within the team? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How can you explain that to a very young child? Because you have to have like, I have to put in the art notes into the stage direction, so to speak, like have it, that Charles has like his fingertips up to his temples and he's concentrating very hard and these waves are coming out of his head. And you have to put all that in the stage directions, in the art notes, so that the artist knows to draw that. So it's not just writing the text, it's also writing the art notes to tell the illustrator what to draw.
Hmm.
And the illustrator in this case is Shane Clester, and this is actually the third book that we've worked on together. The second book, I thought I had it here, but I guess I don't, was hmm, The Great Food Truck Caper, which was a Spidey and His Amazing Friends children's book that we worked on together for Scholastic. And then the first book we worked on together is definitely here, is The Thread of Thanos, which was an Avengers
Mm.
children's book that we worked on, I think came out in 2018. I don't want to check because I don't want to take time from this podcast to go looking up a date. So, you know, but it's always love collaborating with Shane, and he's extremely talented. He's really good.
Yeah, yeah. Now you have also been working in another world that I love, and that ties back to my younger years, which is mythology. And I remember, of course, Clash of the Titans, and there was actually this little line of like plastic action figures. We might have talked about this last time that
Maybe.
I had that just mingled so well with my characters from Marvel and DC. So you've been exploring and doing some research in myths and legends as well, and I think that's for Quartro. Am I saying that right?
It's Quarto.
Quarto, Quarto. Okay, I added
Yeah.
another R there. Quarto.
That's okay. Yeah, Quarto's the publisher. That's coming out in September. Um, it's called the Encyclopedia of Epic Myths and Legends. Uh, First of all, plot twist, it's not actually an encyclopedia, but I call it that because it's sort of like an encyclopedic. It's this book that's kind of like it gives you a full survey of the greatest myths from various cultures.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it shows off my encyclopedic knowledge of the subject, and it's kind of encyclopedic in it's encyclopedic in its scope. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, yeah, and basically I wrote the book for a couple different reasons. First of all, I thought I wanted to write a book on mythology that took a more diverse approach than you often see in books on myths and legends. So deal with not just Greek and Roman mythology and Norse mythology, although that is in there. But we also deal with Chinese and Japanese and Korean mythology, and mythology from various African countries like the Ashanti people of Ghana and uh, the Yoruba people of Nigeria and Benin, and uh, the Fon people of Dahomey, and like so all these different. It's very wide ranging. Obviously the Egyptian folks as well, the kingdom of ancient Egypt and the pharaohs. Um, and I wanted it to be very not only diverse in terms of that, but also in terms of gender.
Mm-hmm.
And so I noticed this very weird thing when I was reading a lot of books on mythology that I used as research for this book. And this is nothing against them or anything, but I noticed that a lot of these other books that have already been published, there's sections on heroes. All of the heroes were men. And
Mm-hmm.
this is true, and I think this says more about the societies that we're talking about because this is something that unfortunately a lot of different cultures have had in common over the centuries, which is, misogyny, misogyny and chauvinism and, and all those awful things. And so I wanted to change that, but I thought I can't just invent female heroes. But I thought, well, there have got to be female heroes. Of course there are. We're just not thinking of them like that. So all we
Mm-hmm.
need to do is kind of reframe the way we're thinking about this,
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one of the things that I did that helped with that was in the first chapter, I provide a definition for mythology. It's not a definition that the eventual definition that we settle on is one that I came up with. But what I use as sort of the starting point is the phrase, the story of a people, because that's what the term mythos means in ancient Greek. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the story of a people or the story of a culture. Um, and then I go into like, okay, what does that mean? How can we narrow it down? How can we make it a much more detailed definition than just the story of a people, but still have it relate to every myth that I cover in the book? Again, that deals with like the encyclopedic range of the book,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Mm-hmm.
scope. Um, and I thought, okay, now that I've explained it like that, that it's basically it's the story of a culture, and it deals with like heroes or gods or monsters, deals with people who may or may not have lived, have really existed. It can deal with the supernatural, but it doesn't have to. Uh, you know, then you've got, and that's not exactly the way I phrase it, but that's basically the gist of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then you extrapolate from that. You think, oh, well, under that definition, Mulan is a
Mm-hmm.
myth.
Mm-hmm.
Some people only know Mulan as the Disney movie from the 90s, but that movie is based on the actual myth of Mulan, which started in a folktale and a song just centuries ago. And that song, which is very short, was used as the basis for um, stories and folk tales and plays, stage plays over the centuries, and then in the early 20th century, movies. There was at least one silent film about Mulan, and then you go on up to the present day, and you go about 25 years ago, you got the Mulan Disney animated movie, which everyone knows. Um, and because if Robin Hood is a myth, and he absolutely is, he fits all the same criteria for being a hero that Mulan does, and he fits all the same criteria for being a myth that Mulan does. No one
Mm-hmm.
knows if Robin Hood really existed. He may or may not have. And depending on which historian you talk to, it's kind of funny because I noticed this weird thing about Robin Hood. Some historians, when you talk to them about whether Robin Hood was real or not, whether he really existed, some of them are like, "Of course he wasn't. What are you kidding? It's ridiculous. He's obviously just whoever created those ballads in the Middle Ages about Robin Hood, that's where he started. That's where the legend of Robin Hood started." But some other historians are like, well, it's possible he may have really existed, or that there was a real person who was the basis for Robin Hood. Just like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
historians now say that there was a real person who was the basis for King Arthur. And so uh, if Robin Hood is this person who started out as being the main character in a folk ballad, and Mulan was the this character who started out as being the main character in a folk ballad, that gives them kind of the same weight. You know what I mean? And
Mhm,
Mulan
mhm.
obviously deserves to be in the book. Scheherazade, from the 1001 Arabian Nights, from that story, she is absolutely a hero because she saves every woman in the kingdom for being murdered by the king. Because the king, he marries a different woman every night, and then the next day he has them executed. Um, because he's got some issues, the king does.
It
And
sounds
so
like it. Yeah.
Scheherazade calms him down and tells him a story and tells him a different story every night. And that delays her own execution, but it also stops the king from, once the king would have executed Scheherazade, he would have moved on to a different one, to another woman, and then another woman after that, and then another. So by using the healing power of storytelling to uh, change her husband, the king's mind, and using the healing power of storytelling to give him more empathy, she stops him from having these murderous impulses. Now, in real life, that's not exactly the way mental illness works.
Mhm,
Exactly.
mhm.
It's not that easy to stop someone from murdering. Um, and what we're dealing with the king is someone with serious mental health issues, obviously. Uh, and so I'm not trying to make light of that or anything. But what I am saying is that the story is about the healing power of storytelling. The story is about how stories make connections between people. They allow you to have empathy for someone who's not exactly like you, and for you to see how what they're going through is pretty universal and is very similar to what you're going through. And that's what the stories of Scheherazade is really about when you think about it. But, also, Scheherazade saved an entire kingdom full of women without ever having to pick up a sword.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
isn't that amazing? You
Yeah.
know? But she's not usually included in the hero sections of most of these books about myths and legends. And when I talk about legends, by the way, I talk about what makes someone a legend as opposed to just any other kind of myth. Is that a legend is the story of a mythical character who may or may not have really existed.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
so there there are people like like King Arthur and like Robin Hood who obviously fall into that category, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's really interesting to think about just the power of storytelling and the linking of empathy. I appreciate what you're saying there about bringing out stories that have been told but haven't been really told in this way and kind of seen as on par or part of a legend, a myth kind of framework.
Yeah, yeah. And it was really interesting. It was a real journey going on doing the research for this book, because there was a lot of stuff I thought I knew
Hmm.
that I in fact had not faulty information for. Like a really good example of that is, um, okay, talk about other characters that we might know from our childhood that we don't, that are myths that we don't realize are myths, like Santa Claus, um, and the Tooth Fairy, and characters like that, leprechauns. Um, Leprechauns in general, no specific leprechaun. But we don't, they're these characters from our childhood, so we don't think of them as myths, but they absolutely are.
Hmm.
And one of the things I thought I absolutely knew beyond a shadow of a doubt about Santa Claus was that he was inspired by or somewhat based on Odin, the Norse god Odin.
Hmm.
And I found, but you go on down the rabbit hole and you do a deep dive on any of these subjects, on any of these folkloric or mythic characters, and you find sometimes that what you thought was true is not. And in fact, that's a misnomer. Santa Claus was not actually based on Odin, the Norse god Odin. Um, the reason that people think that is because some of the Christmas traditions come from uh, pagan pre-Christian traditions that were
Hmm.
blended with the Christmas holiday and that became part of the Christmas holiday. But Santa Claus is not really one of them. But it's just one of those things that you dig and you dig and you dig, and it gives you the answer, you know.
Yeah.
So it was so writing that book was sort of a learning journey for me as well. It was like a way for me to learn. I thought I knew a certain amount about the subject, and I was definitely an expert on the subject before I wrote the book. But you know, some of these things surprised even me.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And it sounds like there was a great deal of research that went into it. And I also know that you're a person who writes in the world of video games and
Yes.
video game creating. And so I'm wondering kind of what those processes are like. I imagine that involves a lot of research and thinking about kind of the framing up of how a game works. You mentioned Minecraft before we started recording.
Oh, yes. Yes. I've written a couple of Minecraft children's books. This one, Mobs in the Mansion, came out in January of 2024. And the next one, Trouble Brewing, comes out in, I believe, September, around the same time as the Encyclopedia of Myths and Legends, the Encyclopedia of Epic Myths and Legends, I should say.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, and the Minecraft books are fun to write. There's sort of two topics there because yes, I do write scripts for a lot of video games, and then sometimes I write books and graphic novels based on video games
mhm,
as well. And this obviously falls into the latter category. My process for actually writing scripts for video games, it varies sometimes depending on the game, but often it's sort of, and I discussed a little bit of this in the last interview, just when I was talking about like my writing process in general when I'm working on um, fiction of any kind. But a lot of it entails uh, drawing thumbnail sketches at the beginning, uh, and sort of putting together what I sometimes call the story cauldron, where you just everything gets in the pot. There's no bad ideas.
mhm,
Um, no idea is a bad idea. There are no wrong answers, you know. And then just sort of while I'm drawing the thumbnail sketches, and that's giving me ideas for scenes and characters and gags and jokes and like just but also action sequences. Because you're sort of what you're doing is creating like storyboards and like sort of like who are these characters? What is the world that they inhabit? And you'd be surprised just drawing like one thumbnail sketch how that can like spur a bunch of other things. If you're drawing, let's say you're drawing the queen of some fantasy kingdom, and you're drawing like a little thumbnail sketch of her, and she's got like you've decided to give her this weird looking scepter, and then you're like, oh, what? Maybe that scepter has a name. Maybe that scepter has an origin story. Where does that scepter has like a weird sort of like it's part of it's made of oak and part of it's made of emerald, and maybe she went to like different places to get each material for it, and you know what I mean, all of a
mhm,
sudden
mhm,
like that gives you ideas for where the story can go and for what the backstory is of that, you know what I mean, maybe she's sort of like a fish creature, you've drawn her, she has gills, and you're like, oh, and what's that? Okay, then I need to like put a bubble sort of helmet on her so that she can breathe, so that she has water to breathe. And what's the story behind that? Is there some, does she live in an undersea kingdom, or does she live in a surface world kingdom, but she's from the sea? And do you know what I mean? All of a
mhm.
sudden, like every one of the visuals that you've come up with gives you like potential story ideas. And maybe some of this stuff, or maybe all of this stuff, is never used. But I found that at least some of it is going to get used. And
Yeah.
what I think is really exciting is when, okay, let's see, for the past 5 or 6 video game projects I've worked on, I've put together a story Bible for each one.
Mm, mhm,
Because a lot of them are based in like either an alternate universe or some fantasy kingdom or an alternate world or whatever. And so it's a world that's not quite our own. Um, and so one of the first things I do is I come up with the story Bible, and it's sort of like the series Bible for a TV show, and it's like kind of setting up the world of the game.
mhm,
Uh, it's what is this world that we're in? How is it different from our own world? What are the rules? What are the do's and don'ts for this world? What are the different social classes? What's the hierarchy? What's You know what I mean? So, like, for example, Star Wars, if there was a series Bible with, if George Lucas, I know he'd come up with a bunch of preparatory notes when he was writing the first Star Wars movie. Um, so that's sort of like his unofficial Bible. But I'm sure at some point in there it said, that there's the galaxy has been taken over by um, this fascist government called the Empire, and at the heart of the Empire is the Emperor, is Emperor Palpatine, and he's got these shock troops called stormtroopers who carry out his dirty work, and you know what I'm saying? And he's got his
Hmm.
Sith Lords, and Darth Vader is his most prized Sith Lord, and and that's like, and then fighting against the Empire is the rebellion. And before the Empire took over, there was the Republic, and you know what I mean. It's pretty, but you can, even as I'm telling you about this now, Jason, you can see that what works about the Star Wars universe is that it's so easy to digest. It's you
Mm-hmm.
get it. You get it that it's basically World War II in outer space, and the Empire is the Nazis, and the rebellion is the Allies, or you could say that it's like the French Resistance or something, you know what I mean? Or maybe a little bit of both. Um, and that's basically the concept behind it. Obviously, that's not the total concept. Obviously, George Lucas was inspired by Japanese samurai movies from the 50s and 60s. Obviously, he was also inspired by Flash Gordon comics and various other things, and various pulp magazine stories and science fiction novels from the 30s and 40s. But you kind of get what he's going for, even by just hearing me say like those few things about the social classes and the kind of world that's being set up.
Yeah.
Um, and so a lot of that is what goes into the story Bible for a video game, and so does like the names and biographies of the different characters, little character bios showing who each one is, what their personality is like, what their character flaws are, what they're good at, what their backstory is. When I say what they're good at, like what are their loves, what are their passions, what do they love to do? Does one of them like to play the banjo? Do any of them like egg salad sandwiches? I don't know, like silly, but they can be these things that seem silly at first, but actually have a lot of dramatic resonance when you get into the game.
Hmm.
Or they can give you like some much needed comic relief when you get into the game so that everything isn't very sad. Um, when I was working on this game called Dame Time Ogden, which was Damian Lillard, the basketball player, hired this video game company to create a video game about him. But because he didn't have the rights for the NBA, so we couldn't say NBA anywhere in the game. And so we had it take place in an alternate universe where basketball was outlawed. And you play as Damian Lillard in college. He's on a basketball scholarship, but he's on one of the only basketball scholarships because, again, because professional team sports, organized professional team sports have sort of been disbanded all over the world. The reason for that is there was this horrible event called um, there was okay, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That basically uh, the entire world is sort of in rebuilding mode. All the buildings have like scaffolding all over them, and the reason is that this megalomaniacal architect and futurist came named Dominic Hatch created this city on the moon, try and colonize the moon, but in doing so, he bankrupted all the nations of the earth. And so
Hmm.
it's like the Great Depression, but like 25 times as bad. Um, and so many industries were just completely depleted and don't exist anymore. And so like having the idea of having like a basketball team is like unthought of by most people. And so like it's this universe, it's this world that myself and a lot of the folks at the game company Grow Your Base created. Um, to like sort of figure out what kind of world this was, where it's kind of like our world, but it's kind of not. And so I wrote up this massive story Bible to encompass all these ideas because basically what it was that, there were a lot of Damian Lillard NFTs. There were like four or five of them. And like one of them showed Damian on the moon fighting against a bunch of robots. One of them showed, I think, um, him fighting a bunch of Oni, which are Japanese demons. I talk about Oni in the book. the Encyclopedia of Epic Myths and Legends. There's a section on Oni and explaining what they are. Yeah, so they in the game that like one of the NFTs dealt with Japanese Oni, which are demons in Japanese folklore and mythology. And it was like, okay, so how does all this fit together? What does all of this mean? So I was like, okay, maybe this world is maybe someone tried to create a city on the moon and that's why you're on the moon in that one NFT. And maybe the person who created the city on the moon was also experimenting with artificial intelligence and cybernetics and robotics, and that's why the robots are playing basketball against Damian Lillard on the moon. And that's, you know what I mean? And maybe they're like this sort of the unfinished world. It's destroyed the world, but it's also brought out all these different like groups of monsters. And so like the Oni are one of those groups of monsters. And so like I created this the story Bible to like explain all that stuff. And that really helped us get a sense of who the what the world is like. And what was great is when I was working on the game, you could tell that an idea had really inspired everybody, and that it was like it was people were uh, enjoying it, that they liked that idea because they would use it in casual conversation. Um, so there was like the L12 Corporation, which is like Dominic Hatch's corporation that's like sort of controlling a lot of things in this world. And it's sort of like very big brothery. Um, and when I first pitched it on a Zoom call with the game's development team, and they started using, okay, so like maybe when we design this skyscraper for L12, and when we have these L12 robots patrolling everywhere, and I was like, oh, they really like the L12 idea that there's this L12 corporation. So I guess I should keep going with that because they seem to like it, and so they're using it in casual conversation. It's spurring them to come up with other ideas for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
when I was working on the Minecraft books, it's interesting because you have to write them like you're playing the video game. So like you're playing Minecraft. You have to like if you say, oh, I want to chop down this wall, and the walls, it's like a rock wall or a wooden wall or whatever, and you have to, okay, I need a pickaxe to do that. But first, you need to craft a pickaxe. So you need to actually get the materials to craft the pickaxe. Then you need to craft it. You need to like get like a crafting table and everything, craft it, and then you use the pickaxe. So you need to do all that in the book because the idea is that the book's story is unfolding just like the game Minecraft would unfold. And so the idea is that you have to write it like that. And so it's always a really interesting story challenge in terms of like writing one of these stories and making it work and everything. And I always feel a really big sense of achievement when I've written one of these Minecraft stories because it's like this was a lot of fun. This was really interesting, and it's a really new and unusual way to write a children's book story for me, or at least it was the first time with Mobs in the Mansion. I think you get used to it more after that. But I mean that in a good way. It was like a really good challenge, and it was really fun, and it's fun working with the people at Mojang, which is the company that produces the Minecraft games. Um, and it's like I'm really proud of these books. I think they turned out really well. It's Alan Batson is the illustrator. He does an incredibly good job. There's like fully painted artwork that just looks beautiful. And yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm not awfully familiar with Minecraft, but I have students that love it, and I remember trying to teach a lesson in literacy that was kind of Minecraft inspired, and just thinking about these worlds of trying to build these pieces. So I imagine that's fun as a writer, but also kind of challenging the first time around, especially as you mentioned.
Well, the biggest challenge for it, honestly, Jason, is like because of the fact that you need to have room in the story to like craft all these things and to brew potions and other stuff like that, you need to make the story like as few story beats as possible, but you also need to keep it really interesting and have a lot of action sequences in there as well. And you have a
Mm-hmm.
limited number of pages and a limited word count that you have to stick to as well. So you have to make it work within those rules. Um, but again, like each time I come up with a story, for this, I feel a really good sense of achievement. And it's like, there, I think kids will really, really like this. I think that it'll hold up if you're really, really into Minecraft, the games. If you're super into that, you'll realize that this book is very true to that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, fantastic creating and world building and exploring. You also, the last time we met, I think there was a puppet involved. There was a puppet
Yes,
that you
there's
had.
a puppet involved.
Um, so I believe the puppet has a backstory as well. This needs to be like the cover photo for the podcast episode, I believe.
Yes, this is. I don't know if this guy officially has a name. He was originally going to be. I originally created this for a puppetry class that I took when I was at NYU. They offered a puppetry class. I'm not going to take that class because
Right,
I was
right.
like a big fan of Jim Henson when I was a kid. Stop. And you know, I this was originally going to be an Edgar Allan Poe puppet. But
I
I
can
never
see
got
it.
around to giving him a mustache. Can you see it?
Uh-huh, I can
Can you
see
see
it.
it as a potential Edgar Allan Poe? And I was going to have him have like the sort of the comb over that Edgar Allan Poe had, and I never got around to putting hair on him. So he's just this bizarre Nosferatu looking puppet. So then you cut to years later when I was a staff writer on a TV show called World's Dumbest. Uh, Full title is True TV Presents World's Dumbest, and it was a show where people would send us video clips, and we would write comedy sketches and jokes making fun of the clips, right?
Hmm, hmm.
And one day I bring this into the writer's room and we have like I wish I had the footage with me still, but um I had the great fortune of working with Gilbert Gottfried, the late great comedian Gilbert Gottfried,
Yeah.
on World's Dumbest. About halfway through, I worked on like the last two seasons of the show, and about halfway through my time on the show, Gilbert got added as a cast member. He was a new cast member, and everyone, as you might imagine, was a big, big fan of his work. Always couldn't wait to work with him. He was always so much fun to work with, and he was always like endlessly inventive. Like you'd give him like an idea or a one sentence joke, and he could like build that into like this amazing comic monologue. And he was brilliant. And but one day when it was not me, but it was one of the other writers was like on the soundstage with him, like the green screen studio that we had, like that was like across the hallway from the writer's room. And they were like they like just kept trying to spook him with this puppet. And like there's all this footage, it's somewhere. Um if anyone from the show still has it, because the show's been out of production for like over like a decade now. Um but there was I was watching like the dailies from one of the days of shooting, and there was like one of the writers like from off camera came in with this puppet and was like "Ooh," and then Gilbert was like, "Oh my God, what the hell?" And then Gilbert was in on the joke, and then Gilbert was like doing like little comedy bits with the puppet.
Right, right.
And it's amazing none of that actually made it in. It's a shame that none of that made it into the show because it would have been really a lot of fun. But I wish I still had the footage from that day because that was pretty hilarious. But also working on that show, Jason, had I wrote a Superman sketch for the show that
Hmm.
made it to air. Um, so that aired, I can't remember which episode of the show it was, but I can tell you that that actually gave me new insight into the character of Superman.
Nice, nice.
Maybe like so we had this sketch where like it's very simple. It's very, very simple. And it's like, this guy, and we had gotten a video clip of this kid who like glued, like he was like using a phone booth and he glued the phone. Oh, I think his brother. No, no, no. He was trying to prank, like let's say his brother or someone by like putting glue on the phone receiver, but he accidentally tried out the prank
Right,
without thinking, and then like, oh no, the phone is glued to my face. And so then I wrote like a little sketch. It's only like a minute long or something, where you like see all this like row of people waiting to use the phone book, including Superman, played by Kevin McCaffrey. And he's like, "Come on, some of us need to have stuff to do." Okay, Clark, keep it together, And Kevin McCaffrey, who's really good at playing like really kind of like these like Midwestern, like suburban dads on the show. So
hmm,
we thought that he'd be good at playing Superman, and he was, and he had like the spit curl and everything, and it was kind of perfect. But what I thought was funny was that, okay, when you write a sketch for a comedy show like that, um, you're often de facto directing the comedy sketches as well, even though there's a credited director for all the for everything on the show who's not you.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
sometimes just the writer of the sketch in question is the best person to kind of direct it, um, even if it's just like de facto directing it, but just because you have the best idea in your head of what needs to be on camera. Um, and so I would sometimes get called out of the writer's room to like help direct a sketch because like Ari, the head writer will be like, Ari, what did you have in mind for this nightclub sketch or something like that. And so for the Superman sketch, what I thought was funny was when we were putting together Kevin's Superman costume, obviously it has to be that it's Clark Kent, right?
Hmm.
And it's Clark Kent about to change into Superman, and maybe he's like partially changed into Superman, but it can't just be wearing his Clark Kent costume because if that's the case, no one's going to get that it's supposed to be Clark Kent. No one's going to get that it's supposed to be Superman. So we have to have like the costume somewhat peeking through, but
Hmm.
we have to have it just peeking through. We can't have it more than that because if it's more than that, it either looks like we tried a few different ways, if the shirt is because we have to have like the Superman suit underneath the suit and tie because we have him wearing like the traditional Clark Kent suit and tie, right?
Hmm.
We have like suit pants and a blazer and a button-down shirt and a tie, but the tie has to be disheveled, so that's fine. But then we had him just wear all the buttons were unbuttoned, and we just had the Superman t-shirt underneath, and it looked like he was just some dude wearing a Superman shirt.
Right,
And I
right.
was like, oh, that's awful. Okay. So we need to have like some of the buttons tied up. We had to figure out like how many was too many. And so it's like two or three buttons, and you can see the Superman shirt poking through. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh.
but it's not all the, so it's obvious that it's Clark Kent doing a terrible job of pretending not to be Superman. So
Right.
that then adds another layer to the joke, but it also makes it really obvious to the audience that who they're looking at is Clark Kent slash Superman. Do you see what I'm saying?
Hmm. Hmm.
You can't make him just look like a guy in a suit. That doesn't communicate the gag. That it's Clark Kent slash Superman. You can't have him be completely unbuttoned because then it doesn't it looks like some guy who just bought a Superman t-shirt at Comic-Con or whatever. And so you have to be like somewhere in the middle, and it's a very delicate balance to achieve. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so weird because you don't think about this stuff when you're just sitting at your laptop and writing this stuff. You sometimes don't think about like how delicate an act it is of the act of directing something is,
Hmm.
you know, and that like it's so delicate. If you go too far one way than the other, you can just ruin it completely, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was kind of funny because I was like, wow. I mean, I'm not, and again, I was telling you this before, and I'm not comparing myself to Richard Donner or any of the other people who've directed actual Superman movies or Superman TV shows, but that must be something that they've thought about at certain points because it does it what about the costume of Clark Kent makes it Clark Kent's costume? Do you know what I'm saying? You need to
Hmm.
like you find yourself thinking about these things in a very granular way. Anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, yeah. Now you, by means of a final question or a final topic, you have
Mhm.
also created in the world of Batman. We talked the last time about sort of the 80th anniversary of Batman, and we're now at
Yeah.
85. And so I think you're part of the Batman mythos now. I think that you are ingrained there, and you showed me a magazine, and I think they used me as maybe the model for the cover. I'm pretty sure that's what is it.
Yeah, no, I
Yep,
think I think this was Jason. I didn't
I
want to. You don't
think
have
that's right.
glasses here for some reason, but
That's
aside from
true.
that, it's like I'm looking at a picture of Jason right here.
Exactly, of
Um,
course, of course.
yeah. Jason DeHart and you know, approved by the Comics Code.
That's right.
I didn't know you were approved by the Comics Code.
Well, it took a little while, but they did, in triplicate, all of those
There you go.
things.
But I just got these the other day in the mail because basically, like, I should just explain if anyone listening to this hasn't seen the first interview. I've written three Batman children's books for Penguin Random House, and also written a Batman parody story for Mad Magazine, which is owned by DC. So technically, it's a DC comic. Um, and I wrote it in 2019. It came out in 2019 for Batman's 80th birthday, Batman's 80th anniversary. And I'm like getting it right here. And it was called What If Batman Were Really 80 Years Old? It's been
Hmm.
reprinted a bunch of times over the past 5 years. It was in this like all Batman. It's not all Batman, but it's mostly Batman issue of Mad Magazine, which is like Mad number 23 in February 2022, which is like in the new numbering since they started over in 2018, I think it was. They started over the numbering with like number one, like it was a new version of Mad.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and in the one that's going to be out on Free Comic Book Day next month in May. I don't know when this episode's going to air, Jason, but right now, as
We'll
I'm
get it out
saying,
soon.
this is the
Hmm.
day before tax day. It's April 14th,
That's right.
2024. So yeah, but they've slightly tweaked the title for this Free Comic Book Day version of it. So it's what if Batman were actually 85 years old? Because now it's Batman's 85th birthday.
Hmm.
And it's a story I'm really proud of. I had a lot of fun writing it. Pete Woods, great artist on Deadpool comics and Action Comics and various other Marvel and DC titles. He was the illustrator of that story and did an amazing job. And so they've tweaked the title so that it's appropriate for Batman's 85th birthday.
There it
And it's funny
is.
because I was actually thinking about this a few days ago and I was thinking, it's too bad I didn't get to do anything Batman related this year because I want to be part of the Batman 85th birthday celebration. Not to make this about me.
Hmm.
It's about
Hmm.
Batman, a fictional character. But I was Batman's always had a special place in my heart. It's one of the first comic book characters that I remember being truly obsessed with as a kid, for various reasons. And it was really fun writing this story that I realized when I was talking to you last time that I sort of think of as the final Batman story, the way that if I were like the Batman group editor, or if I was writing Batman comics right now, if the DC editor said to me like, okay, Ari, what would you like to be the last Batman story ever? Like
Hmm.
we're not gonna make any more Batman stories. We're just gonna have one big story, one big blowout issue. And it would be this. It would be Batman and the Joker as old men playing chess in Washington Square Park
I bet.
or in Gotham Square Park, I guess. Um, and that's the end of their story because honestly, the way I think of it, I'd rather see those two characters achieve some sort of understanding. I know that sounds ludicrous to a lot of you listening to this because Joker is a psychopath, but but maybe he gets the help that he truly needs. The
We can hope.
maybe there's some really good mental health professionals in Gotham who aren't completely corrupt, because the ones we've seen so far are very corrupt in a lot of the Gotham in a lot of the Batman comics. But maybe he gets help and he emerges a much emerges someone as someone who's healed and who's a much nicer person, and he realizes that he and Batman have a lot in common, which I think has always been the subtext of a lot of Batman stories. That
Yeah.
Batman and Joker are very similar. And so yeah, that story is going to come out. It's going to be re-released if in a few weeks if you haven't read it, in the Mad Free Comic Book Day issue, which I don't think there's a number on it. I think it's just Mad's Free Comic Book Day issue, which it has a lot of parodies of comic book characters, as you can see, because the cover is Superman. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Jason, it's not you.
Yes. Yes. That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. Maybe someday. Maybe someday they'll put me on the cover.
Maybe someday. We can all hope. I've never been on the cover, so you know, don't feel
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, as I mentioned at the beginning of our talk, you are a prolific person. I imagine you have lots of things that are on the way that you can't even talk about. As I usually ask at the end of episodes, any place where you would recommend that folks go to follow the creating and to check out the projects as they come to be?
Well, I've been working on a lot of children's books for various branches of various imprints of Penguin Random House, and also for Scholastic. Um, and so right now on Penguin Random House's website, you can get the first four 96 Facts books. These are a series that books that I've written that are middle grade celebrity biographies. The first one is 96 Facts about Taylor Swift. And the second one is 96 Facts about Timothy Chalamet. These are all illustrated, I should say, by Risa Rodel. I hope I'm pronouncing her name right. I've never met her in person, so I've only like corresponded very briefly on Instagram. So I don't, Risa, I hope I'm saying your name right. I should probably ask how to pronounce it. The second one is 96 Facts about Timothy Chalamet. And the third book is 96 Facts about Selena Gomez. And the fourth book is 96 Facts about Lizzo. And these are all out now. In June, I think it's June 4th, um, there will be the fifth and sixth books, which are 96 Facts about Bad Bunny and 96
Nice.
Facts, yeah, 96 Facts about BTS. And I'm really proud of all these books. I'm still working on, some of the others in that series. And then after that, I think in November, there's 96 Facts about Mr. Beast, the YouTube personality, Mr. Beast, the YouTuber. Um, and that was fascinating writing that too, because like he's accomplished a lot in what has been a relatively short period of time, since he started out. Um,
What a
but
range
a
of
lot,
people. Range of
yeah.
people. Yeah.
And I'm really proud of these books. I think the 96 Facts books have been doing they've been doing well. That they were so much fun to write. It's always a great. I always really enjoy, doing all the research that this involves and trying to really like what don't people know about Taylor Swift? What don't people know about Timothy Chalamet?
Mm,
Um, these kinds of what don't they know about Taylor Swift's songwriting, about other side projects she's worked on. I don't want to make these obvious. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I figure I can bring my like geekish obsession with obscure things, which every nerdy person has, and bring that to writing these books. And if I could do that, that's a good thing. And I think I've successfully managed to do that. So
Yeah. Yeah. The research process continues.
it really does. Yeah. And there's other stuff that I'll be announcing soon that I haven't been able to announce yet, but in various types of media. So various mediums. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah. Well, looking forward to all of the creating to come, and thanks for stopping by for a second chat to
thank
cover
you very
some of
much.
the recent titles and additions to the library.
Oh, I have one other thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's one thing I can't believe this. I forgot to mention about the Encyclopedia of Epic Myths and Legends. That book, there's a very nerdy component to that book that I completely left out because I was talking about like the sort of you know, the different cultures that I talk about in the book, which is very important. But also I talk about the pop culture aspect
Hmm.
of reading.
Hmm.
I talk about in the book about like the Marvel version of Thor and Loki and Star Wars and how it's indebted to various myths and legends from various cultures. And how the Hunger Games was very inspired by the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. And that kind of stuff is all over the book.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and
Cool.
I get into it in a big bad way. In a way that I think maybe a lot of comic book fans aren't even expecting. Like, so you might be surprised. Obviously, a lot of folks know that Star Wars was inspired by various myths and legends. They might not know what some of its influences were in the realm of myths and legends. And so they'll find that out in the book, but they definitely don't know some of the other things that I put in the book as far as like different pop culture IPs that were influenced by ancient mythology. And so anyway, that's something that's a big part of the book, and just wanted to mention that.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, looking forward to it. Looking forward to digging in and finding the results of all the research all the time. And thank you for the time. Thank you for the conversation about the work.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure being on here. I really appreciate it, and good talking to you, Jason.
Great to talk with you as well. And we are twinning with you have Star Wars over your shoulder with Drew Moss art, and I'm
Yes.
currently showcasing some Star Wars as we're talking as well. So
Oh,
we
very nice. Did Drew draw that as well?
oh no, sorry.
Oh,
This
okay.
is I actually don't know who drew this, but yeah, Drew is doing amazing stuff out there. So just wanted to point that connection out between me and your wall.
Oh, very nice. Yeah. Yeah, this was a story that I wrote for Star Wars Adventures back in 2019. And it's if you missed seeing it the first time, you can get it in this Star Wars Adventures Fight the Empire trade
Nice.
paperback, which is out, I think, from IDW. I think Marvel is now doing the new Star Wars Adventures series since um IDW doesn't have the license anymore. But these are stories from 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, around that period. And I wrote this in 2019. And so in this Fight the Empire trade, you can see my story, which is called Major Domo Major Problems. And it's about Jabba the Hutt's Major Domo, Bib Fortuna, and how overworked he is
Nice.
because he's basically Jabba's intern. And it's a fun, funny little story. And I had a lot of fun working on it. Drew illustrated that, Drew Moss.
Awesome, awesome. Well, we shall talk again at some point in the future. And once more, thanks so much for the time and all of the creating, all of the creating.
Thank you. Thanks.